You're not behind because you didn't start investing at 22. You're behind if you hit your mid-40s, look up, and realize your entire future is already booked by payments you agreed to years ago. So here's the uncomfortable question that decides whether your 50s and 60s feel calm or claustrophobic. Are you building a life you can afford, or a life you have to maintain? Because your 40s don't just determine how much money you'll have. They determine how often you'll feel trapped by it. Picture this. It's a normal weeknight. You're exhausted, but sleep won't come. Your mind is doing that relentless spreadsheet in your head thing: mortgage, car payment, daycare or sports fees, insurance, groceries, that one subscription you forgot to cancel, the credit card you promised you'd pay off next month. Then your phone lights up. Your bank app, trying to be helpful, reminding you your balance dipped under $1,000 again. And you just stare at the ceiling thinking, how is this possible? Because you're not broke, not technically. You're earning more than you ever have. But you've never felt more financially cornered. That feeling is the real story of the 40s. In your 20s, you can mess up and reset. In your 30s, you can hustle and recover. But in your 40s, decisions don't just cost money. What you really want is to wake up at 60 and feel like you have choices. Choices about work, choices about health, choices about family, choices about time. And the weird part is, you can have a high income and still have zero choices. Because your income can rise, while your freedom quietly disappears. This is the fork in the road nobody announces. It doesn't come with a sign that says, choose now or regret later. It shows up as normal upgrades. A nicer house because the kids need space. A newer car because you're tired of repairs. A bigger lifestyle because we work hard, we deserve it. And one day you realize your monthly expenses are no longer a list. They're a cage. Let me show you the two paths. Path 1 is the one that looks impressive. From the outside, it screams, we made it. Great neighborhood, solid schools, 2 newer cars, maybe a few luxury subscriptions, maybe vacations that look incredible on Instagram. But inside that life, every dollar already has an assignment. Most of your paycheck is locked into fixed costs before you even touch it. So when something breaks, because something always breaks, you don't calmly handle it. You shuffle money, swipe a card, and tell yourself you'll catch up soon. That soon never arrives. Path 2 doesn't look as flashy. You might drive something a few years older. You might live in a house that's not maxing out what the bank would approve. But there's a difference you can't see from the street. There's space, there's margin. There's a chunk of income that isn't promised to anyone yet. And that margin changes everything because it turns life from reactive to deliberate. Here's what most people miss. The difference between these two paths isn't usually intelligence. And it's not even income. It's overhead. It's the weight of your fixed monthly obligations. In your 40s, overhead becomes destiny. Because this decade is when compounding stops being a cute concept and becomes a countdown. Not, you're too late. That's not the message. The message is, the resets get fewer. When you're 27, you can waste money and still have a long runway. When you're 41 with kids, a mortgage, and aging parents entering the picture, your runway isn't gone, but it's no longer infinite. So every decision hits harder. A mistake at 25 is a lesson. A mistake at 45 can become a lifestyle you're stuck funding for 20 years. And that's why your 40s decide comfort or stress. Because the biggest financial battle in your 40s isn't investing. It's escaping the high-income, low-breathing room trap. It's the trap where you make more and somehow feel poorer. Let's talk about how that happens. It usually starts with one upgrade that seems reasonable. A slightly bigger mortgage because we'll grow into it. Then a car payment because we need something reliable. Then another because we can afford it. Then the costs that come with those decisions: insurance, maintenance, taxes, higher utilities, the kind of spending that quietly expands to match your new normal. And before you know it, your income isn't a tool. It's fuel for a machine that can't stop running. Now the scary part. Most people think financial stress comes from not having enough money, but a lot of the time it comes from something more subtle. It comes from having too little buffer between you and disaster. That's what stress is. Exposure. Exposure to one bad month, one layoff, one medical bill, one home repair, one slow business quarter. If you don't have margin, your nervous system knows it even if you're earning 6 figures. That's why two people can make wildly different incomes and feel the same dread. Person A earns $70,000 and spends $68,000. Person B earns $170,000 and spends $168,000. Different lives, same problem. No breathing room. No margin means every surprise becomes a threat, and that constant threat rewires your brain. Here's the part people don't connect. Financial stress doesn't just make you anxious, it makes you worse at decision-making. When you feel squeezed, your mind zooms in on the next bill, the next payment, the next crisis. They just spend decade after decade in firefighting mode, fixing problems instead of building a system, reacting instead of designing, surviving instead of scaling, and the 40s are where that pattern hardens. Because your 40s are the decade where the big, expensive, default decisions show up. Cars, housing, and lifestyle commitments that don't feel permanent until you realize they're attached to 5, 7, or 30-year timelines. So even if your income rises, your freedom doesn't. It actually shrinks. Let's make this painfully real. A car payment doesn't just cost you the monthly number. It costs you the years you're forced to keep earning at a certain level. 2 car payments can quietly become a second mortgage. And what most families don't do is ask the dangerous question. If I lost my income for 6 months, would I still be okay? Not could I scrape by with credit cards. I mean okay, calm, stable, able to think. If the answer is no, then the lifestyle isn't safe. It's fragile. Now let's talk about the biggest commitment of all. Housing. A big house feels like progress. And sometimes it is. But it can also become the cleanest trap in modern life because it feels responsible. It doesn't feel like luxury spending. It feels like adulthood. So you stretch. You normalize the stress. You tell yourself this is what everyone does. And then you realize you didn't buy a home. You bought a monthly obligation that will dictate your choices for decades. This is why the 40s matter so much. Not because you can't recover, but because when your overhead is high, the future becomes less flexible. And flexibility is what you'll crave later. You will crave it when your body changes. You will crave it when your parents need help. You will crave it when your kids need something you didn't expect. You will crave it when you're tired of grinding and you want time back. And you'll either have it, or you'll still be making payments. Here's the shift that changes everything. Stop asking, how do I get more money? Start asking, how do I buy back my options? Because the goal isn't to look successful. The goal is to feel safe. And safe doesn't mean a bigger house. It means a bigger buffer. This is where an emergency fund becomes more than a financial tool. It becomes psychological armor. When you have 3 to 6 months of expenses saved, something changes in your posture. Your phone buzzes and you don't flinch. A surprise bill shows up and your chest doesn't tighten. Your brain stops running constant background calculations. And when your brain gets its bandwidth back, you start seeing opportunities again. That's not motivational fluff. That's how humans work. And then something even bigger happens. You gain what I call walk-away power. Not retire tomorrow money, but enough money to say no. Enough money to negotiate. Enough money to leave the job that's crushing you. Enough money to take a risk that could change your life. Because the difference between a great opportunity and a terrifying one is often just cushion. Think about how many people stay in the wrong job for years. Not because they love it, not because it's meaningful, but because they can't afford a gap in income. So they tolerate disrespect. They tolerate stress. They tolerate soul-draining commutes and unrealistic demands. And their career becomes a hostage situation. Not because they're weak, because they're overcommitted. That's why overhead is more important than income. A dollar you don't owe is a dollar you can deploy. It's a dollar that gives you room to maneuver, and room to maneuver is the currency of peace. In your 40s, peace is the flex. Now, there are a few traps that quietly steal your next 20 years. The first is lifestyle creep. It's the most polite thief in the world. You don't even notice it taking from you. You get a raise, and you tell yourself you'll finally relax. And 6 months later, your expenses have risen to match your new pay. New routines, new standards, new normal. So the raise didn't buy freedom. It bought more life to maintain. A simple rule can break that pattern. Every time your income rises, decide in advance where at least half of that increase goes. Before you feel it, before your lifestyle claims it. Let your life improve, yes, but force your savings and investments to improve faster. If you don't set the rule, life will set it for you. The second trap is celebrating progress by spending it. You finally build a cash cushion and you immediately use it for a vacation. You hit a milestone in your retirement account and you reward yourself with a big purchase. I get the impulse. But understand what you're training yourself to do. You're teaching your brain that saving is just delayed spending, and that habit destroys compounding. Not because vacations are evil, but because your future never gets to keep the wins. The third trap is the upgrade loop. A bigger house, a nicer car, a better lifestyle. Then higher bills, higher stress, higher pressure to keep earning. And because you're stressed, you make more convenience decisions, more takeout, more "we deserve this," more spending to soothe the feeling of running too hard. So you upgrade again, hoping the next level will finally feel secure. It won't, because security isn't a level. It's a gap between what you earn and what you need. So what do you do practically in your 40s? You stop trying to impress people who aren't paying your bills, and you start building a structure that future you will thank you for, not with words, with sleep. First, you need one number that matters more than your salary, your savings rate. Not what you plan to save, what you actually keep. Because two people can earn the same income and build two totally different futures based on how much margin they protect. If you don't know your savings rate, you're driving with no speedometer. You might be moving, but you don't know where you're headed. Next, you attack fixed costs first. Not because cutting costs is fun, but because fixed costs are the bills that follow you into the future. Rent or mortgage, car payments, insurance, debt payments. These are the things that turn your life into a monthly treadmill. If you lower your fixed costs, you don't just save money. You reduce the income you need to survive. That is massive. That is freedom. Then, you stop relying on discipline. Discipline is great until you're tired, stressed, busy, or emotional. So instead, you automate the wins. Automatic transfers on payday. Automatic investing. Automatic savings. If the money leaves before you can negotiate with yourself, you don't have to stay motivated. You just have to stay employed. And that's a much easier system to maintain. After that, you learn to see opportunity cost. Every big purchase has a shadow, not just what you pay, what you give up by paying it. A car isn't just a car. It's what that money could become if it stayed invested for 10, 15, 20 years. A bigger house isn't just a bigger house. It's the options you won't have later because your overhead stayed high. Once you see the shadow cost, impulsive upgrades lose their shine. And finally, you protect margin like it's your job. Because margin is the asset that makes everything else work. Margin is what lets you handle surprises without panic. Margin is what lets you take opportunities without fear. Margin is what turns your 50s into a decade of strength instead of stress. Most people chase returns, but margin gives you something better: control. And this brings us back to the real point. Your 40s are not a deadline. They're a decision about what kind of future you're purchasing, a future filled with payments, or a future filled with options, because you can absolutely earn more in your 50s. But if your overhead is locked in, more income just feeds the machine. If your overhead is low, more income turns into freedom. Same effort, different result. So if you're watching this and feeling that knot in your stomach, Here's the good news. You don't need a dramatic overhaul. You need a direction change. Small shifts compound too. One less payment, one automated transfer, one deliberate decision to live slightly below what you could. That's how calm is built. Not by luck, by design. Before you click away, I want you to answer one question honestly. If your life stayed exactly the same income, same bills, same habits, where would you be in 10 years? Not where you hope you'll be, where the math says you'll be, because that answer is either going to scare you or it's going to motivate you. Either way, it tells you the truth. And I'll leave you with this. At 60, you won't care if people thought you were doing well in your 40s. You'll care if you can breathe. You'll care if you can help your family without breaking yourself. You'll care if you can walk away from what hurts you. You'll care if you have time. So build that. Build the margin. Because your 40s aren't the end of your financial story. They're the chapter where you decide whether the rest of it feels comfortable or stressed forever.